We're going to go ahead and get started. This presentation will go for an hour, and this is the ICIDS academic paper session, and the topic is up on the board. I can get settled, and if speakers want to get started, go whenever you're ready.
All right, can you all hear me? Yes, all good? You hear me?
Yep, let me just mute our video so that we don't get an echo, and then go ahead and get started.
All right, well, welcome everybody. So I'm not sure how this session was announced, but this is a little bit of an attempt to, try to do something together between two different organizations. Of course, the Internet, the Interactive Technology Foundation and us, basically. And we are IDN, and we run the ICIDS conference every year. That's the International Conference for Interactive Digital Storytelling. This year will be our 18th iteration, so we exist for a while. And we started, Justin and I started talking. I'm the president of IDN, the Association for Research on Digital Interactive Narratives. And we started talking if we cannot do something together, since we have, quite related topics. And so this is kind of our first attempt to do something together by exchanging papers. And so we selected 2 papers from ICIDS, and that means there will also a spot for papers from NarraScope. So that's a bit as a background. Okay, so I will be presenting a paper, and so will Josh after me, that we gave at the last ICIDS conference. And my paper is about, can AI create an interactive digital narrative, a benchmarking framework to evaluate generative AI tools for the design of interactive digital narratives. And I'm the first author, and my co-authors are Mirjam, Palosaari, Eladhari, and Jonathan Barbara. So when we think of generative AI, how can we understand when it comes to interactive narrative, right? And I mean, one thing that we started is that we gave different AI platforms sort of this prompt, create an image of an AI creating an interactive digital narrative. But I mean, basically, generative AI is here, and what does that mean for interactive narrative, interactive digital narrative design, right? I mean, what happens beyond the hype and the concerns, for example, for jobs? And so that's where we're really interested to understand that and facilitate a critical understanding. So this is an overview of our talk. We talk about AI and IDN. We talk about the lack of specific frameworks to understand all of that. When we talk about the creation of evaluation framework, when I will talk about how we conducted an experiment with it, our discussion when we talk about limitations and ethical considerations, and finally the conclusion. So first of all, I think it's important to understand that artificial intelligence and interactive narratives have been connected for a very long time, right? I mean, one of the earliest interactive narratives can be understood as ELIZA, which is came out of MIT as AI lab and is sort of the first chatbot from 1966. And of course, Facade was from about 20 years ago now, was a big milestone in natural language processing and also an interactive narrative. And if you're not familiar with Facade, Facade is an experience where you communicate with 2 virtual characters, and you are in their apartment and they're a couple, and it's clear that their marriage is falling apart. And by typing responses to them and chatting with them, you try to get them to understand that they really need to, see a couples therapist and do something about therapy, or else it will fall apart. And Of course, in general, there have been many research projects applying AI for story generation, for example, for managing narrative progression in terms of drama manager, planner system, content selection algorithms, and for facilitating virtual characters in the past. But in the past, for the most part, these technologies were confined to university labs and larger companies, for example, at AAA game studios. And what has really changed with the current generation of generative AI tools is wide accessibility. All right. So again, here we look a bit into the past, ELIZA, Facade, also PromV, a work that came after Facade, which is about the social anxiety of finding a partner for prom with like 1 week to go. And so basically, I mean, AI and interactive narratives together, that is not a new thing. Right. And we should also be aware that in general, AI is not a new thing. This has been a 70-year effort, nearly 9 years now to be exact, if we take the 1956 Dartmouth conference as a starting point. And specifically, tools like ChatGPT apply large language models result from many, many years of machine learning of text and images. Right. So it's not like this is really in that sense new. It has been coming for a long, long time, and it's finally there, so it has become usable and accessible for many people. So again, when we want to understand interactive narratives, there is a general problem in the lack of specific frameworks for evaluation, for example. Right. So to understand the impact of generative AI on interactive narratives, we need frameworks which understand what interactive narratives actually entail. And many existing frameworks for evaluation, for example, for understanding the quality of print literature or creative writing, were not directly applicable. Because yes, of course, there is a shared understanding maybe of narrative, but writing a book is not the same thing than making an interactive narrative of some sort, right? I mean, it's if your readers cannot change your story, but your interactors can change the narrative path. And also, another problem is standardized benchmarking tools. They do exist, but they cater to an economic context with key performance indicators such as a return rate of a product. And we don't really have that so clearly identified for interactive narratives, right? So, and that has been a problem which has been discussed previously in a group that was formed out of ICIDS, the Benchmark Interactive Narrative Systems Working Group in 2019, but it didn't really come to much of a result ever since. So now when we think about how could we go about creating an evaluation framework for generative AI in relation to interactive narrative, well, we need to start from scratch, right? And so what we did, we applied a grounded approach. And that was, we identified 13 common tasks in interactive narrative design. And then we invited an expert group to provide feedback, which resulted in 2 additional tasks. But we basically confirmed that these 13 tasks actually do exist for narrative designers. And here you see our expert group: Emily Short, Mikael Anderson, Mats Haar, and Jake Forbes, all established narrative designers. So here are these 15 tasks which we selected. First is create dialogue trees. Second one is create character descriptions, protagonists and non-player characters with backstories. Create static images, create videos, animations, create a narrative progression from scratch, create a narrative progression that matches an existing scaffolding, create events, create conflict or juxtapositions, create rule systems, create alternative progressions or choices, create background stories, histories, lore, fictional worlds, create music, create puzzles, create maps, and create entire interactive digital narratives. right? Then we proceeded on writing objectives and requirements for these particular tasks. For example, for dialogue trees, create content for dialogue with a character which fits within a larger narrative progression and serves a purpose within it. And the requirement here would be produce flexible and convincing conversations. So when we, discussed which generative AIs should we take, and here we did a little bit of market research. And again, what I'm talking about is research we did a year ago. So it was ChatGPT 4.0, Claude 3.5 Sonnet, Google Gemini Advanced, and MS Copilot, the Office subscription version. For images, we used ChatGPT using DALL-E, same with Copilot, when Stable Diffusion and Adobe Firefly. For music, we used Suno, and for video, we used Stable Video and InVideo. And then we realized we need to work on our prompts, right? We started with relatively small, short, simple prompts and realized they're insufficient for a lot of the evaluation. And so, when we realize, okay, one prompt per task is not enough if we want to have a bigger understanding. So we decided again that single prompts are not enough, and that when we said, okay, let's have 4 prompts per task to get a wider variety of examples of output. And we also, continuing a tradition that exists at ICIDS since 2008. We reserved one of these 4 tasks to have something that's related to Little Red Riding Hood. Okay, and then we developed our prompts further, right? So for example, task 1.1, the initial prompt was produce a dialogue between the interactor and NPC about allegiance to the current ruler. And in conversation with our expert group, we realized this was not realistic to actual design tasks. It needs to be much more, elaborate. And here you see how we've further iterated on the prompts. So this became produce a dialogue tree between the interactor and the non-player character with a Janissary in 1560 about his allegiance to the Ottoman ruler. Depending on the choices, the interactor might be taken prisoner for being disloyal, might be invited to join the Janissaries, or convince the NPC to betray his cause. And underneath, you see another example how we have developed these prompts further. The result is this evaluation framework here, and you see, of course, only the first task, but first task, creating dialogue tree, objective, requirements, and the 4 prompts we have developed. And so we have in the end 15 tasks with 4 prompts. And so the evaluation framework by itself is about 2,000 words. And this is also a challenge for representing in an academic paper of 6,000 words, right? And the solution that we found is, of course, to offload much of this material to an online drive so people could evaluate themselves and see it there. Then we turned this evaluation framework into a questionnaire, which looked like that. Task 5 explains the objective requirement, provides the prompt, a link to the actual artifact, and a 5-point Likert scale for use as inspiration, use for training, and use in production. When we conducted the experiment and when we looked at 238 outputs, text, images, videos, and sound. You can look at them yourself by following this URL, or you can also just take a picture of the QR code here, and there you will find all of that yourself. And this is really too much material to show in a single presentation. However, here are some examples. On the upper left, you see an image produced by ChatGPT which and the prompt was to create a map which represents the hospital in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And you see here, if you look more closely, that many of these words are like, I mean, some of them are correctly spelled, but not all. And that's a typical problem of AI image generation, let's say summer 2024. To the right, you see in a shell a complete text adventure created by one of the AIs that was fully running. And that was in general a result that we had. All our 4 main generative AI tools were able to create fully working text adventures in Python. So that in that sense, yes, generative AIs can create full works. And to the left, you see an example of societal rules created. That was also one of the prompts. And here the prompt was create societal rules for a society which is a mix out of early Soviet communism and the Middle Empire in Egypt. And you see, this is what was produced. The state is led by a divine pharaoh general secretary, seen as the living embodiment of Karl Marx, and so far and so on. So in terms of compelling outputs, what we saw, it was describing the challenges of a priest commissioner would be facing to have a career in a society mixing ancient Egypt and early Soviet Union. Creating plausible alternative historical scenarios in which World War II was avoided. A very convincing history of a fictitious French car company. Good rules for a pizza baking game. Great dialogue tree for an encounter with a 16th century Osman soldier. And also creating a text adventure in Python. Right, here is one of these highlights, which we really felt was very successful in terms of creating a lot of rules that could really be used in an interactive narrative and would help explain the way you can behave. And for example, this is the second succession of challenges for becoming a priest / commissioner, starting with memorizing the book of the dead of communism, and going to complete a pilgrimage along the Nile, lead a successful collective farm for the whole harvest season, and things like that. Here again, you see all 4 examples for working text adventures creating by generative AI. And I mean, here our feeling was with more extensive or iterative prompting, we could have produced something that could have been even more in depth and longer running. But all of these were fully working and in sense successful. All right. Discussion. What are our key findings? Right. So, I mean, the strengths were that all AI tools excel in ideation education. For example, plausible historical scenarios, creative backstories. But there's also weaknesses in terms of interactivity in many of these, especially when it came to create, narrative sort of storylines with interactivity. Here, most of the tools had no real idea how to make any meaningful choices or branching points or even local interactivity. So that I think is also, we thought it also reflects to that, I mean, the big chorus on which these large language models are based are mostly non-interactive narrative, and it shows. And there was also a problem in actually following prompt, for example, when it came to some of them produce completely unrealistic timelines, or as I said, ignored interactivity. Overall, in our test, the top performing tool was Claude, which surprised us a bit because ChatGPT has much more sort of billing in most people's minds. And here are some of the key findings by experts in terms of evaluation. The highest score was amongst these three narrative designers you see here. Claude for task 6.1. That's a story about how phobia for bananas developed. For Claude, Claude's version of two college buddies that reconcile their differences. 3.67 for Gemini, for the 8-year-old Japanese child navigating its way home at night, and Claude for mending the relationship between two friendly neighboring countries in pre-colonial West Africa, and an alternative version for Little Red Riding Hood. So all of these scored very highly on inspiration. When it comes to training, it already went down a bit. Best here was, Claude again for two college buddies reconciling their differences and the phobia for bananas. And when it came to production readiness, there was sort of also the biggest disagreements between our three narrative designers. The best was still for phobia. Michael Anderson here was the most positive. He was at the time game director for Victoria 3, and gave 4 and better for 18 outputs. Emily Short was the most negative. So Emily Short might, I think, also be a very well-known name. For example, worked on, I think, Fallen London and 80 Days and things like that. And Frederick worked at Square Enix. All right, here are some quotes from these evaluations. Emily Short, for example, says, Classic has enough detail to make the problem sound somewhat psychologically realistic. I wouldn't have the confidence to put this in front of a junior dev. I can imagine that there might be circumstances where this incident, as described, was a good enough fit for the tone and intention of the game that I could be used more or less as is. Frederick Serafin says, Gemini is too verbose for direct use in production, but extremely detailed in giving reasons for its choice, which can make it useful for inspiration or training. While Michael Anderson said, Claude's story for task 6.2 is similar to ChatGPT's, but provides more usable detail about their relationship development and has a more dramatic but less realistic turn of events. Another, opinion from Emily Short, Claude's output for task 6.1 is a bit underdeveloped, as it stands, but it does identify elements that I could imagine using. The possibilities that she gathers resources that might allow her to overcome the wolf herself makes for a much more interesting story than others in which she just never meets him in the first place. Frederick says, the Yono Empire and the Kingdom of Benin are real historical entities in West Africa, which makes the Claude output more trustworthy than the GPT one. Claude does consider interactivity, but only at a mere surface level. Finally, Michael Anderson, Gemini is surprisingly good at describing the scenes and constructions of constructing a good storyline, even with a moral at the end. It suggests art direction and themes. Its interactive elements, however, serve merely as gates in the progression, not really ways for the interactor to make meaningful choices. All right. What are the limitations and what are the important ethical considerations here? So the limitations are we have not really or had not done at the time iterative evaluations, right? I mean, which is, of course, how many people work with generative AI, and we had a relatively small number of expert evaluators. And of course, when it comes to ethics, I mean, we saw clear indications of bias in training data sets, especially towards Eurocentricity, and of course also in regards to basically Eurocentric perspective, patriarchic perspectives were evident. And of course, a big problem is also questions of copyright and compensation for original authors. And these questions are still unresolved. There's still big ongoing lawsuits in this regard. And of course, I mean, we problem of potential misuse of this technology to replace human designers and basically eliminate a lot of jobs. And that's certainly something we don't want. And I mean, that was very much reflected. We actually tried to engage a group of narrative designers online. And here are some of reactions that we got. I'm a narrative designer by trade. I explicitly do not support you all putting me and a ton of my friends out of work. Right. And this was a reaction to me putting up our questionnaire and trying to enlist people to help us with the evaluation. And so we were seen as pure evil in this regard. And so I took that post down after like an hour. At the same time, we are, as academics, are just trying to understand what's going on. And we are certainly, more like messengers or people, we've tried to critically understand what this stuff is good for and what not. But yeah, this is the reaction that we got here. But it was also interesting that some of the group members, when contact me privately and said things like, yeah, what you're doing is absolutely great. And I actually build a business out of that, but don't tell the others. So yeah, even in this group, there seems to be a bit more of a mixed perspective, and it's evident here. Conclusions. Can an AI create an IDN in 2024? Again, from last year? Yes, but only under very specific circumstances, and at that time it was text adventure. And there's of course a need for human design to ensure interactivity, coherence, and cultural relevance. So far, again, 2024, they cannot replace a human designer yet and probably never will, but generative AI tools can provide parts to an IDN, and they can certainly help with ideation and training. Future directions, well, framework updates, iterative evaluation, broader expert involvement if possible. But we also want to finish this talk by making clear that we also see a potential positive impact. We feel this can have a democratization function in terms of improving access to interactive generative design to many people who did not have that so far. And it can also make interactive narrative works more affordable. For example, works for purpose made for smaller non-government organizations, personalized therapy applications, works for private events like birthdays, weddings, things like that. And we actually feel this could lead to a much larger market for interactive narrative design and more employment opportunities for IDN designers than exist so far. And in that sense, we feel people should not only look like, oh, jobs might disappear at AAA game studios. Again, we feel there might be a new market available here. And that ends my talk. And I'm not really sure we have time for questions, but of course, we're also online and we can also chat next to the talk. All right. And that's it for me. Thank you.
I can go quickly if folks have questions in the room for Hartmut.
Yes. Are there questions?
Or online.
Unmuting on our end now. If you want to ask questions in person, feel free to step up. There should also be a couple of text channels, and you can message in there if you're not comfortable or if you're listening online.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Janine. I'm fascinated with the design of this framework study. You had mentioned that you kind of, I would love for you to talk a little more about the decision for it to not be necessarily iterative. Because I remember some folks who had been talking about the use of AI systems specific for storytelling, how the constraints of a story for you to keep details, how iteration can kind of mess with, like, oh, so her hair was purple and then, oh, her blue hair later. Like those types of details, while they are constraining to the power of interactivity sometimes, they can also very quickly not be accurate as you continue to press the model. So can you talk about just why you decide, or the extent of your iterative nature into looking through these prompts? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of didn't do iterative prompting last year, right? So, I mean, this was a consideration for a future version of the framework. But what we did last year was, single prompts. So in that sense, I can't really speak much to your question, I'm afraid. I mean, I think it's an important one. I can probably say that we're working on an update, and there will be some consideration about iterative prompting. But that will be, I mean, the thing is, for us from ICIDS, actually, the deadline for papers is tomorrow. So we're all kind of stressing and working on them. And after this presentation, I will actually switch to talking to my co-authors, where we work on the next iteration of this study.
I was going to say, it's
And
actually.
Josh shouldn't have heard that, but now he knows.
I know. There's, for the audience, there's a bit of a pressure here because I'm probably one of Hartmut's peer reviewers, so he can't really talk about the future work that he may or may not be doing at the moment. So stay tuned. Stay tuned.
All right. And I mean, again, but whatever I just said is a year old, which is sort of very, very long time ago when it comes to generative AI. Right. But I think, I would say the problems that you're talking about, they do still exist, but we're getting less. And one way to deal with them is, for example, with both, for example, ChatGPT and Claude have so-called projects. And in projects, you can store some of the knowledge that should be used for a project, and that helps with consistency and avoiding such issues.
Are there any other questions? I think if not, we can just go on to the next section or the next presentation. All right. Yes, take it away. Yes. One more round of applause as well.
Is it coming up? Good. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so I'm excited to be talking about a project that just came to completion actually in end of May, early June here. And me and my colleagues, Maria Cecile Reyes and Jonathan Barbera, 3 years ago, were kind of all beginning new positions as assistant professors or lecturers who were asked to teach or were hired to teach interactive digital storytelling and interactive digital narrative. And while we found a ton of information about game narrative and games, we were wondering, wow, how this wide, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary sort of form was being taught all across the world. And this presentation is sort of insights from what we learned from that journey, and is also an invitation for everybody at NarraScope to also sort of feel free to submit their own syllabi, their own teaching resources for the next iteration of this collection, which will be coming out in 2028. So one of the things that I was particularly curious about, and I sort of mentioned this, was what does it mean when we say that we're sort of teaching interactive storytelling or we're teaching interactive digital narrative? Um, we know that we all come from different backgrounds. People come from games, people come from theater, people come from English literature, folks come from cinema. There are even individuals who have a background in broadcast who come and bring those skills to interactive storytelling and interactive digital narrative design. And oftentimes, when you look at how to teach these kinds of stories, they come from those very disciplinary perspectives. But what does it mean very broadly? How do we consolidate the discipline then? And how do we help prepare students for being interactive storytellers, interactive designers, or interactive narrative designers, whether they work independently or they decide to go off and work at studios, AAA or otherwise. And so, why we were also interested in this is that the Association for Research in Interactive Digital Narrative has been framing the form as a form that can more capably represent complexity than other forms. And the idea is that if we can represent complexity with greater efficacy, then we can help people have deeper understandings of the world around them and help increase democratic discourse. And so if we can consolidate discipline and help people do that better, fantastic, right? That's a beautiful goal to aspire to for a discipline. But how are we doing it? What does that look like? So when we began to sort of map the process, we collect through the organization, the association, although we reached out through various listservs and other networks and WikiCFP and et cetera, we collected 42 interactive digital narrative or interactive digital storytelling syllabi from around the world. And we asked them to sort of share with us kind of the strategies that they were using and why they were using those strategies, the strengths of those strategies, the potential weaknesses of those strategies. And we wanted to sort of provide all of those insights to future teachers to help them become better doing at the work. So we looked at course objectives, instructional approaches, the way assignments were constructed, how authors were discussing sort of the tactics they were using in the classroom, whether they were sort of pedagogical tactics or storytelling tactics, sort of all used to sort of understand the wide gamut of interactive storytelling teaching practices that were occurring. And so there were a few reasons of doing, like I've mentioned, by doing this, but really it was about sort of also extending our network, which is why it's so exciting to be here to talk to you folks today. Again, we want you to be a part of this, but to sort of engage in this global collaboration of syllabi collections, looking for people who were more interested in not necessarily building sort of a repository, but really sort of commenting on the practice of teaching interactive storytelling and interactive digital narrative. So there are some like really fantastic volumes out there that were published by ETC Press, uh, Teaching for the Game, Volume 1 and 2, and they are expansive volumes that are more repositories and archives. There's also sort of the Open Syllabus platform, which is another repository that has hundreds of different syllabi in them, none on game studies or interactive storytelling, however. So this is meant to be sort of, again, a discipline shaping effort and also standardizing. So one of the issues we're curious about in sort of the interactive digital narrative space specifically was we wanted to make sure that our frameworks were responsive and flexible. Hartmut's presentation just demonstrating that our field moves very quickly dependent upon the technologies that are available at the time for us to build interactive storytelling systems. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to sort of respond and be flexible. We also wanted to make sure that we provided the right amount of information in shared language so that folks were able to develop programs, understand sort of and speak the same language with one another. And we wanted to make sure that because we have this kind of long-term goal of using IDNs to represent complexity to help people have better understanding of complex issues, we really wanted to make sure that we were engaging with the ethical sides of IDNs and in that regard. And so we had to look at other work over the past decades in terms of the teaching of interactive storytelling. So Janet Murray's work in 1990 lays sort of the groundwork for IDN pedagogy, connecting narrative design to interactive storytelling. Reisner actually also Martin Reisner had a keynote during this time, which also sort of connects to the work that Cislas was doing and Ulrich were doing in terms of sort of establishing IDN as an educational framework. There's an explosion in the 2010s where there's this major focus on, what are we teaching? Are we teaching narrative game mechanics? Are we teaching analytical models and frameworks? Are we looking at teaching authoring tools and how to make those tools accessible? And in most recent years, there's been a turn to looking at sort of the globalization and decolonization of interactive digital narrative pedagogy. And so we are now sort of again just setting the groundwork for what is being done in the space right now. So like I said, this project's been going on for 3 years. It began in November 2022, and we did sort of the call for syllabi was initially launched. It happened through WikiCFP, the Games Network listserv. We had a website, syllabi.arden.online, and one we ended up getting was sort of 47 responses. And from those 47 responses, we got 42 syllabi that were initially collected, drafts of syllabi. Now, one of the things that we realized very quickly in this process was that our network didn't reach far enough. And so we actively sought and requested regional editors who would help us go sort of deeper into individual regions around the world, Central Asia, Africa, Central South America, North America, Eastern Western Europe, so on and so forth. And so we ended up getting 6 regional editors agreed to sign up with us. The initial call for presentation also went out in 10 languages. So once we had all of these syllabi in hand, we began our process of comparative analysis with sort of a case-oriented approach to begin gathering this information while still accepting syllabi in a rolling review. We completed the syllabi. We completed our analysis in 2024, and we completed our write-up and results in June of that year. We then sort of ended up having to negotiate and move publishers, and we eventually did get published by Carnegie Mellon University Press in June of this year, but it was a year-long journey to take this finished work and get it out there. Here's a map of the syllabi where they are from all over the world. So we ended up with 14 syllabi from North America, 2 from Canada, 12 from all over the United States, including one from Justin Bortnick. So excited to have him in the collection. We ended up with 19 from Europe. Arden's network is primarily based in Europe, so it's kind of expected to get this kind of a response. South America, we had 3 initially from Colombia, but actually after this presentation, we ended up getting up 3 more, 1 from Ecuador and 2 more from Colombia. And then we ended up with 2 from Africa, 1 from Nigeria, and 1 from South Africa. And in Asia, we had 1 from Indonesia, Iran, Singapore, and 1 from South Korea. So pretty excellent sort of comprehensive net in terms of getting syllabi from all over the world, but by no means comprehensive. And this is why the opportunity to continue to submit to the collection remains open. When I'm going to now move soon to talking about the insights from all of these syllabi, I think it's important that we keep in mind that this is from a expansive but limited sample, expansive geographically, limited in number. We also, when we asked authors to submit their syllabi, or professors rather, teachers to submit their syllabi, we asked them to self-designate what volume or what they felt their syllabi belonged in. They feel that they were teaching a survey class, that it belonged more into, it didn't really connect to a particular subfield or practice of IDN, but it covers like everything in the field. Are they teaching in a humanities-based department? Are they in sort of an English and literature department, a social sciences, or social studies, or a humanities department? So are they in an English or a literature space? Are they sort of in psychology? Are they in design and technology? Was it more computer science, more technically focused, or in the social sciences, political science, for example? And so professors self-identified, and so they said that, hey, my syllabus belongs in the humanities. It belongs in the design technology volume. It belongs in social sciences. And, we did not change that or fight them on that. We just sort of were like, thank you, and we appreciate that, and we'll put it in that location. So we employed a qualitative comparative analysis to look for shared patterns. And so this is where I have to remind everyone that while our data set was not exactly large enough for statistical analysis, We do have enough sort of syllabi from all over the world to begin at least drawing some insights. And our goal with this case-oriented approach is to sort of just present sort of an in-depth understanding of the cases that we do have. We also, as part of the syllabi, asked authors to submit a reflection on their syllabi to put their practices into context. And so this helps also understand sort of how their work was being done and their teaching was being received. We categorize the syllabi then by their course structure, which include its type, whether it's level, undergraduate, graduate, its number of credits, number of length in weeks, and its medium of delivery, hybrid, in person, only online, asynchronous, synchronous. We also provided sort of those content details, which was sort of the objectives, the materials, the weekly outlines and schedules, and any best practices that they think helps students learn how to become better interactive digital storytellers. And we also provided the major assignments. 3 major assignments were requested for each. Instructors provided a wide range of detail in those major assignments, but we made sure that no matter what, we got the purpose, the platform, the duration of the assignment, and by that we mean word count or duration of playtime or duration of runtime, the aesthetics, any sort of coding or technical requirements, any sort of aesthetic requirements, and sort of any other evaluation criteria, whether that was interactivity, narrative quality, or otherwise production value. The instructors were also encouraged that they could go beyond sort of the initial sort of syllabi outline and framework that was provided, the information that we were looking for, but many did not. All right. So how did we go and begin the process of analyzing things and deriving research, deriving insights? So after we collected the initial set, we began to code 3 syllabi using sort of some predefined variables as top-level domains. So the 3 of us as people, scholars in the interactive storytelling and interactive digital narrative space, bring about 30 years combined experience. And so that's where we sort of sourced our ideas for our predefined variables and our domains. From this, we ended up developing a code book, and that code book allowed us to sort of standardize the meanings and variables of the codes that we were using. The code book was iteratively refined and collaborated upon, and it was sort of revised twice more after being further tested and finding agreement on the codes. After that, we coded the rest of the syllabi in Deduce. We focused first on doing the survey courses, making sure that we were applying the codes the same way, making sure that our application of them was effective and that we had consistency. And then we went out and sort of began individually coding the independent volume. So after we did survey together, Jonathan ended up doing design and technology. I did humanities. Maria did social sciences. And then we iterated over those sets, reanalyzing them and making sure that we were all in agreement. The process lasted about 5 months to produce sort of a reliable analysis. So here are some general insights. So what we began seeing was in the social sciences disciplines. These were mostly at a master's level, not PhD, but specifically at a graduate master's level. The design and technology courses had the only PhD course. Surveys was split between 2 undergraduate and 2 master's courses, and the vast majority of humanities-based courses teaching IDN or interactive storytelling were undergraduate focused. In terms of the average duration of the courses that were being taught, most are 15 weeks with 3 hours a week of instruction. And in terms of modality, this is, again, a year ago. This is probably likely shifted, but it was 70% in person, 20% hybrid, and 10% completely online. Okay. So when it comes to objectives, so what are our goals when we're teaching interactive storytelling? What are the objectives that we see across the different classes? What we end up seeing is that in survey, not surprisingly, foundations are what is being covered, that interactive storytelling is connected to critical thinking and practical skills. The graduate courses sort of include general research methodologies and potentially advanced production techniques like coding in Unity or doing Blender work in the survey level. At the humanities space, there's a focus on literacy, as well as sort of project management and just general professionalization. Graduate courses, not surprisingly, again, focusing on the theoretical foundations of the fields and working on the research. In design and tech, these were project-based classes, and so the objectives are really based on sort of those hands-on creation methods. There is generally an idea of learning how to do an industry-oriented skill or practice, developing a particular sort of artifact with potentially collaboration from industry. And so those are primarily in the design and tech space. In terms of the social sciences, we have structures that focus on societal impact, as well as using interactive storytelling tools for engagement and in connecting with others. There's also a focus here on industry as well. Okay. All right. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Generally, they're all around 15 weeks, like I mentioned. In terms of what we're seeing, I really want to point to the fact that all of the classes have iteration that focuses on iteration. Graduate courses built towards a larger public-facing project in the humanities is often iterated upon all the same. Design and tech really focuses on 4 deliverables within 15 weeks. There's usually either graduated complexity in terms of the expectations of using tools like Twine, Bitsy, Unity, or RPGs, or iteration on complexity of a single artifact. And in the social sciences, some of the shorter classes focus on using students' existing skills to go kind of further in terms of the IDN applications they might be building or considering. But those are generally sort of the insights I want to pull out there. Okay, and in terms of assignments, surveys in the focus on analyzing stories and creating ones that demonstrate theoretical and practical considerations. They're often reflection essays in survey classes. Humanities focus on interdisciplinary applications and narrative analysis. Design and tech, not surprisingly, focuses on that elevation of technical skills. Less technical assignments involve sort of critical analysis of existing IDNs and how those existing IDNs have implemented technical implementations. And in the social sciences, the real life applications are emphasized and sort of providing industry-like scenarios in those assignments. Here's where things get interesting. So, you'd expect in a discipline, interactive storytelling, interactive digital narrative, that we would have sort of shared materials that we're teaching. What we ended up finding was that we actually don't have too many shared materials broadly. And there are some shared materials within the different volumes. When it comes to shared readings, we were shocked to find that there were zero readings that were shared. In the humanities, we had one book. In design and tech, we had a limited number of articles and books. In the social sciences, just 4. But it's okay, maybe shared viewings. And in shared viewings, we had less. We have no shared viewings across 3 of the volumes. And in social sciences, we only had 2. We talk about shared artifacts then. So shared artifacts of interactive storytelling, interactive digital narrative. Okay, now we have some. So as we would hope, at least, we are talking about building these things. We do have a bunch that are shared here. Interestingly, we end up seeing that they are all kind of like the humanities, they're older artifacts than in design and technology. And so we might think about how the humanities might integrate some more contemporary artifacts. For shared tools here, Twine wins by a landslide. Unity in second, but there are some familiar names up there as well. Sort of, HTML, Bitsy, Inky. And so one of the things what we notice is that IDN pedagogy basically shares teaching approaches globally, but through disciplinary diversity. So folks are teaching about agency, but they might be Unity or using cards, right? They might be teaching about branching storytelling, but they might be using like a Miro board or something, or they might be using yarn and index cards. And so the pedagogical approaches that we see folks talking about in their best practices or in their reflections that they provided was that they're constructivists. So students are learning through real world context and building things. They're collaborative. All of the student-led discussions, kind of in peer review exercises that we see in all of the assignments. That we all believe that meaning is co-constructed through conversation and collaboration and narrative, that by telling stories in our classrooms and using stories in our classrooms, we learn how to become better storytellers and teach individuals to become better storytellers. And we have more work to do in this respect. So we want to bring in more regions. We want to get more granular. We want to bring in syllabi from more places. And we want to sort of make sure that their archives are open. So the book is available for free. You can get it from idnsyllabi.com. I urge you to download the PDF. You can also get it printed, but it's available for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you once again. Do we have anyone who wants to talk? Questions? I'm going to go over there and ask it. And anyone watching online, you can put it in one of the chats. You unmute the mic here? Yeah. Is this on here? Okay.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk.
Hi.
I was wondering earlier in the talk, you mentioned how in some of your previous work, after doing that work, you kind of came to the conclusion that in future work, you wanted to focus more looking at globalization and decolonization. So I was wondering if you all had any kind of specific methods or practices that you used, like in this research specifically regarding decolonization. So in the side of like where the syllabi came from geographically, I saw that there are definitely like a number of syllabi from the West, from North America, and from Europe. So I'm wondering if y'all did kind of any research in terms of like looking at the differences between like syllabi from the West versus not from the West and things like that.
That's an awesome question. Thank you for that. So Maria, my co-author, has done specific work on, with Hartmut actually about putting decolonial frameworks together for IDN research. And so all of that was top of mind. We were hoping that by identifying regional editors that we could sort of rely on their expertise, their network, and their connections, and not come in sort of as colonizers looking to extract information from these places. That worked a little bit, mixed bag. We had a number of troubles. So we struggled to get connections in the Middle East and in Africa. But the connections we made were through the regional editors that wanted to build up the knowledge for those communities in those spaces. So that was an exciting sort of move for us. One of the few of the other things we did was that the call for syllabi was shared in not just sort of Northern, Western European listservs, and it was also translated into multiple languages to become accessible. And to your last question, which I think I wish we had looked more at, and maybe it's something we should do for the next edition of the collection, was because we used a template to ask for syllabi, we did not get a chance to compare the different structures of syllabi from different places. We asked people to sort of transpose their syllabi into this template. And we did that for a number of reasons. One is often universities own the syllabi itself, right? But not what the professor is teaching. And so we can't include like university language or anything like that. So there was sort of a practical reason for creating those templates. But you bring up a really interesting and valid point that definitely would be fascinating to look at. So thank you for that question.
We probably have time for one more short question if someone has it. If not, then I think, yeah.
I just have a quick comment. I went to DIGRA 2023 and Stephanie Bullock and Patrick Lemieux had a really awesome session then talking about game canons and like game texts as like the canon of what games are, blah, blah, blah. Just briefly, I would love to connect you to their work because they were actually sourcing syllabi that used games as the single text to talk about all sorts of things, not directly IDNS, but that the syllabus would teach over the course of the entire term one game and then branch out from there. So I don't have any details at all other than I'd probably facilitate. I could do an email where we all, jump all together. But that just pinged my memory of they were sourcing syllabi for that. I would love for your sourcing to meet up with their sourcing. So.
That's a great idea. Thank you. Thank you.
That's good.
All right. That is unfortunately time. Yeah, if we get one more round of applause for our speakers. Yeah, and thank you guys for your time as well.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Have a good one.